Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this FP&A Trends Webinar, where today we'll be talking about skills of the future, best-in-class FP&A teams, and how to build the team. My name is Hans Gobin. I'm the FP&A Trends Ambassador, and today I'll facilitate this meeting. Just in terms of stats, we've got almost 500 people joining us from 62 countries around the world. And we've also got 3 great panelists with great topics and subject to talk to us today. So let me move on and share with you what we have for you on the agenda. On the agenda, we've got skills of the future, the key trends and findings of our paper, the 7 important FP&A roles as we know of, building winning FP&A teams, a case study, finance soft skills optimization, and one of the key topics is FP&A as a storyteller. We will go on to do some conclusions and recommendation, and then we will go on to our Q&A session for today. So now is a good time for me to introduce my panelists. So members of the panel, if you can put your webcam on and come and join me, that will be great. Our first speaker or panelist today is Alistair Gurney, who's Group FP&A Director at Unit4. And today, Alistair will share with us how he built a winning FP&A team within the COVID period. So, Alistair, great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Hans. Pleasure to be here. Slightly concerning that of a 3-line bio, FP&A Trends Digital Event Speaker is one of the things that gets mentioned. But hopefully, as I age, more can get added to that list.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alistair. Our second presenter will be Valerie Martin, who's Finance Director at Autodesk. And of course, she has got a lot of skills on softer skills, and she will talk to us about how in finance we can optimize those skills. So Valerie, great to have you with us today.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Valerie. And finally, we have Saurabh Jain. Saurabh Jain is VP Business Performance Controlling at Siemens Healthineer. And today, Saurabh will talk to us about FP&A as a storyteller in itself. So, Saurabh, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Hans. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues joining from all over the globe. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, members of the panel. We've got 3 great presentations coming for you guys. If you don't mind switching your webcam and going on mute for now, we've still got a few housekeeping slides to go through. A quick slide on FP&A Trends Group, guys. Please read it. As you know, we are in 27 cities, 16 countries, and 4 continents. Right, what is our webinar today? So it's a 1-hour webinar. We've got 2 polling questions for you, so please give us your point of view. What are you doing in your organization on the topics we're talking about today? You will be able to vote via our chat there. Also, you can ask questions to our speakers via the chat box. Please do so and tell us who you want the question to go to. We have the presentation available for you to download in handouts. You will also receive a copy of the recording and presentation after the meeting. More importantly, when I close the meeting, there is a survey session. So if you can just stay back for 30 seconds and tell us about how well we did, but also what are the key topics you would like to hear of in the future. Thank you. Let me quickly introduce to you our technology partner for today, who is Unit4. And we all know Unit4, they are a global leader in enterprise cloud software for people-centric organizations. So thank you very much, Unit4. Now, I've got a few introductory slides that I'd like to take you through. First of all, introducing Skills of the Future, paper that we did in December, where you can go and discover best-in-class FP&A tools, the new skill set, benchmark your company against what the others are doing, and you have here how we've done this paper, etc. Very important, we will hear from all of our presenters today on quite a few of these skill sets and what's happening within the organization as well. What were the key findings of this paper? There's 8 here. I'm not going to dwell on all of them. Of course, as we find FP&A now has got more of a strategic importance and role to play within the organization. They are now sitting at the table. Some of them are even sitting at board level. So we are big part of decision making. The new roles and skills I will cover shortly. New ideas on how to develop those skills. Our panelists will cover some of those today. Embedded technology and partners, very, very important is technology. We have to adopt, adapt, and use technology so we can ourselves improve our skill set. Agile decision making, never has it been more important than within the last 2 years and going forward. Storytelling, we've got a great piece of presentation from Shorab on storytelling. What we've seen in organizations, we are crying out for storytellers, how to best make all of the data, etc., and then, bring that to that next level. Emotional intelligence, Valerie will be covering some of the emotional intelligence. And finally, one of the biggest findings we found that people believe FP&A are future leaders of the organization. In some organizations, we already see FP&A directors becoming CFOs. Not just stopping there, but also going that one step forward into the CEO role and potentially the CEO role. What have I got next? Here, I think we've seen the 5 FP&A roles before, which is the architect, the analyst, the data scientist, the storyteller, and also the influencer before. What we've seen now, organizations are having new roles called connector and the interpreter. And the connector are people who connects the whole organization. XP&A is another key thing we're seeing. So here, how do you connect, the whole organization, all the different business units, not just in terms of business, people, geographies, etc. Also, you have the interpreter who knows the business inside out and can interpret absolutely everything for everyone within the organization. So these are 2 new roles we've seen coming up. These are going to be covered within our presentations. So let me quickly move on to the final slide that I've got, which is the T-shaped FP&A department. Of course, we are specialists in 1 or 2 skill set, but what we're finding more and more is that people are generalists in the others. So you have to have a good understanding of how things are moving, what's happening, and then how you work within these sort of environments as well. So with that, I will move on to our first presentation, which will be from Alistair Gurney, Group FP&A Director at Unit4, and today he will share with us his own case study. So Alistair, over to you whenever you're ready.
Hi, thanks for the intro, Hans. Really appreciate it. Pleasure to be here and speak to all of you, despite the fact I can't see you. At some point, this might happen in person, and I might see some of you, which would be nice. So I joined Unit4 just under 2 years ago now. At the time, the team was in a relative state of disarray. The previous leader had left. Various people were in roles that they didn't particularly enjoy or had been with the business and sort of inherited positions that they weren't thriving in. And one consequence of that is the overperformance of the team had probably slipped a little bit. We'd lost a bit of trust from the organisation, and that's a very negative loop to get into. So I was tasked with trying to get the team on its feet, working efficiently and supporting the business as we know that FP&A can when done well. To try and get my head around the challenges we had, I just sort of stepped through it in more or less the following order. At least this is what it felt like in hindsight. To see what systems we had in place was one part of it, but the data maturity here is quite important as well, because we had very good systems. We had a tool which was excellent, but it had probably been allowed to drift. There'd been a lack of discipline in the way it was used, and it had become quite complex and not very intuitive, and that meant the utilization of the tooling was lower than perhaps it should be. And underneath that, we had huge data governance issues in the organization. Master data wasn't clearly managed and maintained, so that however good your systems are, you're funneling crap into them, and then sure enough, the answers we were spitting out were not always recognized by the business, let's say. So there's a lot of work to do in conjunction with my colleagues in IT to try and improve the structure and process there before we could make any material difference in what we were doing as an FP&A team. I had to understand what analytics were going on in the business. So this wasn't looking within the FP&A team, but looking across the business, because we're part of the analytical power of a business. But analytics and FP&A to some extent happens a lot outside of finance. So you've got analysts in sales ops, you've got analysts in marketing, you've got analysts in IT working out how systems are being used. You've got analysts in dev looking at sort of sprint cadence and productivity of the dev teams and so on. So there's lots of analytics happening, but there's a question of whether that's all being done to a similar specification, off a common data sets, and to a common standard, and where that overlaps with the role of the finance business partners. So understanding where we were there was pretty key. Knowing what my team wanted, what they were good at, why they weren't particularly motivated bluntly when I started, and what they were looking for, so that I could help work with them and they could see a route to a job that they all wanted. And then also trying to break down some of the barriers we had around the perception of finance, which is a very, as mentioned, a very negative thing when you're not really trusted. So people don't come to you, they don't engage with you, which means you can't then help them, which means you get worse, which means they trust you less, and so on and so forth. If we go to the next slide, please. So what I tried to build up, so I looked at the skills in the team, and the way I'll go through this is what we were trying to build, and I'll talk about the skills at each step. So the underpinning thing that we needed was great business partnering. So we needed to work with the business, we needed to be trusted by the business, and that has to be underpinned by reliable information. If your business partner is going to your operating manager and showing them data they don't recognize and they don't see how that maps to their organization, then they won't really work very efficiently with you, and they won't come to you for answers because they don't trust the answers they get. So the skills we really need there are this, I mean, particularly that sort of interpreter role and the architect role. So the architect who looks after our FP&A system, he needed to be allowed a lot more freedom. So instead of just following the business, we empowered him to start improving things, actually do a sort of bottom-up system cleanse. So we started to get much cleaner information, and then really looking at the skill set we had in the business partnering team to make sure that they had the right personal qualities to engage really effectively with the business and to start building that trust of the business. Next thing there is processes. Now, it's slightly debatable where in the sort of 7 skill sets this sits, but the stress here is the business-friendly process, right? So the FP&A team, we run the budget process, we run a forecasting process, we indirectly control quite a lot of the process around month end, around actually sort of preparing all the board materials and so on. So making sure we have someone in place who's sort of that kind of connector role, who can really link up the different bits of the organization that need to feed into these processes and make sure the process works for the business, not just efficient for finance, but really works for the business. It was very important. Once those processes are in place, you've got a bit of trust in the business, good information flowing around, we can start to say, okay, so how do we now get some insight here? We've got some of the building blocks in place, and then it was looking at that storytelling piece, and how can we take a bunch of data and a bunch of information and understanding, but really condense it into a neat narrative which we can share at any level of the business, whether it's playing it back to sort of all hands calls, or playing it back to the board, or playing it back to our lenders, or whatever. So that was pretty key. And again, this was a case of identifying somebody in the team who actually has these skills, great business writer, but they'd never been asked to do it. All they were doing was consolidating spreadsheets. So by unleashing that person, actually we've got a guy who's really good at writing board decks, and he'd never had the opportunity to write them before. So I didn't have to hire someone. He's got a more satisfying job. Everyone has won in that change. And then we kind of get on to level 2, which is really leveraging the wider data in the business. So can we start to pull in some of that analysis which is going on elsewhere, leveraging not just the pure finance data, but some of the other operational data we've got in the business, feed that back into our FP&A system. So we've got like multiple sources going into one tool and provide much more insightful analysis. And that's where we're starting to try and unify some of the analysis that's happening. So we're not just doing that cost piece in FP&A, but working with the analysts in the rest of the business to make sure everything's done off a common platform. And then that can feed back into your first point and improve those business partnering relationships, driven by a wider volume, wider array of reliable information, and so on and so forth. So that's the cycle we're going through. It's the next slide, please. So I mean, in some of a few things which are really key in Frodis, and I think building a winning FP&A, I'll say we're still very much in the building phase. It's a work in progress, but key things we found, the communication with everyone has been critical. So setting the tone from the start with the business. So not trying to be defensive of what we do, but simply saying, look, we've got problems and we want to work with you to fix them because that's in your interests. That very open communication with the business has been really important. I think being open to see the skills and the people we had in the team, rather than simply looking at the roles they did, has enabled us to get the best out of the team. We've actually changed very few people, but we've changed almost everybody's jobs, and that's worked really well so far. Where we have had to change people, big focus on talent. So identify that you're going to have to change someone early, or that you're going to grow a role early, and then you can hire on talent, give that person time to develop the knowledge. If you're hiring late, you almost certainly need to hire someone with experience so they can hit the ground running. But ultimately, you get a worse person potentially. So hire early, hire on talent would be my advice. And the other part, which is a little bit political, but I think to create that virtuous circle, like really control the narrative. So make sure that you proactively give the feedback on the processes you run. If you're holding the pen, you can normally cast things in a way that give people confidence in how the team's working, and that feeds back into the way the business partners can work with the business and so things develop. Thanks, Hans. That's my key findings.
Thank you very much, Alistair. A great case study here. Of course, lots of companies have had very similar issues of having to build a team with all these constraints, and the way you've taken us through it. Thank you for that. Can I ask my fellow panelists to come and join us? I've got a question for to put to all of you, and I think here, looking at the 7 roles there, one of the key important roles we're seeing happening is the role of the data scientist is becoming key these days. How should we be embracing it in our FP&A organization? So an example or anything you're doing within your organization you can share with us, that would be greatly appreciated. Valerie, can I come to you first, please?
Yes, absolutely. I think the data scientist is becoming more and more an important role, especially with big data, a lot of different types of data. So really understanding what's reliable, what really brings a business insight, what really does it mean for the business? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it data that we really need? And how is it meaningful? So I think it's a role that's very important in any key organization, especially with the data that we're working with in FP&A today.
Thank you, Valerie. Saurabh, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, so data is the new gold, and managing it and using it purposefully is a skill, and that skill has to sit with FP&A if you want to drive the narrative, as Alistair just the last point you made, drive the narrative. So I would say within Siemens, we emphasize on hiring the particular skill set and then enhance it with training, particularly around Python or some of the business automation and intelligence processes. It's a continuous learning. We acquire the skill set, we train people, and we want to make data the driving force, the currency around entire organization.
Absolutely spot on that. So thank you very much, Saurabh. Thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you very much for your presentation. Alistair, let us now find out from our audience and from our esteemed members as to what they're doing. If I may just run the first polling question there. What are you doing within your organization? And again, I thought it's quite important to ask, again, the same sort of question as to what role and skill set would benefit mostly your organization. If you can vote, please. So the first one, of course, is analyst, the architect, the data scientist, the influencer, the storyteller. So investment in which one of these will benefit your organization the most. So I'll give you another 10, 15 seconds to vote. So is it the analyst? Is it the architect? Is it the data scientist, as we've just discussed? Is it the influencer, or is it the storyteller? If you can vote, please, that'll be great. I am now going to close the polling question, and I'm going to share the results. And 24% says the analyst, 20% the architect, 20% the data scientist, 18% influencer, 18% storyteller. So the analyst wins it at 24%, but they are more or less on par. Alistair, a quick comment from you, please.
I mean, it's practically a dead heat, isn't it? Which I think highlights how each of those roles is sort of critical. Because one, I think that you can analyze everything in the world, but if you can't then communicate that to the business, it's of somewhat limited value. But yeah, I agree. Without quality analysis and architecture, the FP&A team has no legs. So
absolutely,
yeah, I agree.
Absolutely spot on there. Yeah, no, absolutely on par. It shows the importance of all of these roles. So thank you very much for that, Alistair. Let me hide this and let us move on to our next presentation for today, which is from Valerie Martin, who's Finance Director at Autodesk. And today she will talk to us about finance soft skills optimization. So over to you, Valerie, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Hans. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to talk about soft skills optimization. I hope everybody's staying healthy and safe, and hopefully similar to Alistair, we could all meet one day. So let's get started. So why are we here today? So things are changing. So things are changing on how we're making decisions, how are we working with our trends and the future of works today, and how is it working in finance? So similar to what Alistair mentioned, the data is accessible more and more. Middle management having tools either with technology to self-serve and find insights. So it's interesting how everybody, there's more information that's being done and decisions are made quick on the spot. At the same time, if you look at how FP&A is positioned, we're pulled in different types of decision making now. We're pulled into other matrix that we're not used to do in traditional finance. We're pulled into topics that the board of directors are interested in. An example will be ESG, sustainability, looking at diversity, human capital and risk management, where FP&A has more and more an impact in actually influencing decisions. Now, if you look at our future of trends and work, so if you look at your talent pool, diversity is top of mind. So more there's diversity, more there's a competitive edge in each time we actually look at data and information. And therefore, everybody has a point of view, everybody has a different perspective and an opinion. So how do you work in an environment like that? It brings a lot of focus on soft skill, and FP&A has a key demand on these soft skills and how it exists on our roles today, and how can we actually influence our skills of our roles tomorrow. And then if you look at finance in general, data actually is becoming more and more central. There's big data, different types of data, and we need to interpret those data. And then how do you use those type of roles that Hans mentioned, those 5 roles, and how can you actually make finance at the central of influencing those decisions, and how can we actually leverage soft skills? So this looks all pretty. So if we move to the next slide, I'll show you what this means for FP&A. So if you look at what it means for FP&A, and I'm looking at it 3 different lenses, is I'm looking at how do we drive a culture of change, and how do we look at how does it look today? And when I mean about culture, I'm talking about behaviors. How do we reward our teams? What behaviors do we want to drive? Is it something about precision now, or do we just need to be accurate? Is it something that we need to spend our value in building tools versus driving automation? How do we look at our teams? We work in finance in different silos, or do we work on projects now across multiple teams and functions? And then how do we look at business results, and what does business results really mean? Then if you look at the lens of driving our talent, either existing pool or the ones that we hire, how do we recruit today? Do we look at the what versus the how? How do we drive our mindset change? It's not working harder, but it's more focused on different things or a different lens. And then how do we bring EQ, or emotional intelligence, or soft skills to the ground? And how do we drive that in our teams, where traditional FP&A leaders, we weren't doing that? And last but not least is, as leaders, how do we drive accountability, not only on our teams, but across the board and either at senior exec? And how do you build the trust and an importance of each role? All of those has an impact of driving decision and making finance one of the most important people in the room. So let's move to the next slide, and I'll show you how I've attempted of doing that and sharing tips and tricks that I've been experienced today at Autodesk. So if I look at culture change, one thing we try to do is really change a behavior guide where performance is drove to that, and it's driven through different behaviors. So finance, we're used to have precision, not make mistakes, everything has to be accurate, and that's how you drive performance. But how do you change an environment of curiosity where we need to be innovative, doing things differently with new tools, being adaptable where there's new metrics that we're actually learning and what it really means, and how can we be impactful and spend our time in the right ways? And that also goes on how we do things, like really working on one team. So it's not praising one individual in a competitive environment that usually are in finance. It's how can we work together and work on a project? So one thing that works is we actually push down a top-down behavior guide where performance is tied to it. We do reward and recognition on a quarterly basis where we show examples of how an employee was actually innovative or asked questions or being courageous, and really practicing that soft skills versus being necessarily on traditional performance where it's on precision and making sure everything is accurate to the penny. Another thing we've been doing is belonging workshops. So it's great in this environment of understanding the what, but how do we do things? And it's really like also, how do you understand your team? So make sure you build that element of trust, but also with our stakeholders and our partners, so they actually believe or actually trust the information we have. And it starts a lot of relationship, and building relationships starts with empathy and also understanding the trust. Another thing we actually on workshops, we're actually training skills about making decisions. Now that decision information is available very quickly and in different formats, well, how do we make decisions quicker to move forward? And usually it's like, it could be as simple as identifying who's making the decision, especially we're in a matrix organization, especially at Autodesk. And how do we make the decision? Is it based on consensus? That usually takes a lot of time. Or it's one person making a decision on an advice round. So a lot of understanding of how the decision is made is something that we do a lot. And another thing is actually on these workshops is feedback skills. So it's one thing of understanding how to make the decision and how to partner with people, but how do you receive feedback? Are people being defensive? How do we call them out? It's really practicing those soft skills and really understanding the tools you need when you know that something is happening. Now, moving out of the culture and really moving as talent, if you look at your talent pool, you have your existing pool and you have those that actually are hiring. We can hire like we hired in the past based on what the person studied and the curriculum and all the technical skills. A lot of it is they're going to understand of how to work, being adaptive, and really focus on the what and what's the culture they're going to add to your team versus being the same old. And then how are you going to bring a different point of view? Because you need to be covered on your blind spots. But working with these type of different personality or point of view, it brings a lot of practice in that soft skills to really get the most out of it. And then it's really a question of shifting your mindset. If I think about it in my career, when I started being a junior analyst, you move to a manager, then to a director, and moving up the chain, it's not necessarily what you know, is really how you do it, and it's a shift of mindset. So it's practicing the type of question where traditional finance would focus on the what, but it's really understanding those 5 whys and the curiosity on it. And really understanding the question, the so what, and it's always by building those relationships and how to be creative. So now if you move under, how do we do that as finance leaders in FP&A? So first of all, we need to break down silos. We need to remove this mindset of which team does what and competent, and all work together and increase communication. Really focus on accountability based on a project versus by team. And then conversion of communication is very key. You saw in Alistair's last slide how communication was a key learning. Well, we need to continue to over-communicate, and we need to do it with soft skills. And last but not least is how to create this psychology safety with our teams. Finance traditionally think about mistakes as the performance plan, but now how do we make them to encourage that mistakes are okay? What type of mistakes make sense? How do you actually learn from those mistakes, and what's the outcome that comes to it? It really takes a lot of the safety and workshops that we did. We did a workshop the other day and understand how we could actually speak up and bring more ideas. And it was interesting to see that people that were in the company for a long time was afraid of speaking up for X reason. And those that were new is because they were trying to figure out their place. And it could be as simple as a manager, instead of saying somebody of, okay, what do you think about that, to put them on the spot so they freeze, versus saying another question saying, well, what has been said that you haven't actually, that you think that could actually add to it, or we haven't spoke of? So there's kind of ways that you could do it where you could bring people where they're at or join them versus, you know, where you're at and pull on them. And taking risk is key. So these are just a few examples that I've used in my organization, how to adapt soft skills. So hopefully this could be tips and tricks for you in your organization. Thank you. Pass on back to you, Hans.
Thank you very much, Valerie. You know, leaving with this last bit of thought there, psychological safety, fantastic area. We seem to have lost you on the webcam there, Valerie. If you can come back, please, that would be great. So thank you for that. Let me ask also the other panelists to come and join me and tell us a little bit more about how are they fostering an environment whereby FP&A softer skills can flourish or is flourishing. Are you doing anything different? Alistair, can I start with yourself?
Yeah, I think the point you made, Valerie, around needing a bit of empathy in the team is really key. So I think showing that from top down and encouraging commercial understanding so people can engage with the rest of the business about the stuff they care about. So it shouldn't just be finance, should never be the explanation. There should always be a discussion around what's really going on commercially. To encourage that, I always get most junior people in the team, I don't just push them into analytical roles, we actually get them to come and present their findings and so on. Try and encourage no one in the organization to shoot the messenger. You can't always guarantee other people's behavior, but you can at least be defensive and show that you're supporting your team when shots start getting fired. And also encourage them, they don't just have to be nice. It's very easy to be nice to people. It's much harder to share the bad news and say that this is how it is and play everything with a straight bat. So really encourage people to do that and support them when they do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alistair. Saurabh, can I come to you, please?
Yes, indeed. I think very good presentation, Valerie. I think culture and addressing the skills and soft skills at that is a very difficult topic because you have to walk the talk. And that is the responsibility of the senior most person sitting on top of the pyramid and all the way because the rest of the organization emulates. So it's a continuous process. We need to set the rules, reward and recognize the compliance to the rules, and walk the talk, as I said. The top leadership should, by their action, demonstrate how it needs to be done. But great thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair and Saurabh, for your comments, and also thank you very much for a great presentation, Valerie. Let us now move on and ask our audience as to through our polling question, what do you think, and I'm just launching the poll, what do you think are the barriers to world-class soft skills within your organization? Is it lack of training? People, there's no training available there. Is it because we just don't have the time to do the training because of work constraints? Or is it because of leadership and culture, as we've just seen, it has to come from the top. They have to be telling us about all of these. So if you can vote, please. Again, is it lack of training? Is it no time for the training because there's so much work to do? Or is it leadership and culture? And do you think it's all of the above? I'll give it another 5 seconds, and then I am going to close the polling question now, and I'll share the results. So 7% have said lack of training, 26% because there's too much work, they don't have time to train, 31% leadership and culture, and 36% all of the above. Valerie, a quick comment on the poll here from you, please.
Sure. I think it's interesting. I do agree with the poll. I do think that all of the above makes sense. I do think it's a mixture of all of them, depending on the size of the organization or the matureness of it. But I do think it's all about the best way to learn is to be put in situations. So it's all about mindset, think differently, and making sure we make it a priority. So I would say it's a lot about awareness too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So let us now hide this and move on to our final presentation for today, which is from Saurabh Jain, who's VP Business Performance Controlling at Siemens Healthineer. And today he will take us through storytelling. So over to you, Saurabh, whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you very much, Hans. Let's start with my presentation. Okay, so picking up on the string of 7 traits, as Hans illustrated, I'll talk about storytelling today. So according to a study by McKinsey, nearly 38.6 million potential FTEs could be displaced through the process of automation. Furthermore, the jobs that involve collecting and processing data would be increasingly better and faster managed by machines. However, let's look at it this way. Automation will have a lesser effect on jobs that involve managing people, applying expertise, and social interactions. That should not come as a surprise at all. But the real question is, how are we faring through this transition? Are we adding expertise? Are we storytelling? Storytelling, or the soft skills thereof, would be the main skill differentiator in future, as I'll illustrate in my next slide. So in my early years, when I was fairly young and junior, I was once explaining key monthly numbers to the management, mainly a combination of non-financial colleagues and executives. And during the meeting, I somehow realized that the audience was lost on a spectrum of bored, mesmerized, or outrightly confused, as if I was playing a Mandarin movie without subtitles. My panel information, my financial information, and my due, which I took a great pride in, was not being appreciated by the colleagues. Tell me something about underappreciated effort and love. So do you also feel that your organization faces similar challenges? FP&A is mainly driving reporting and very little insight, or we have meetings, but there are no actions in those meetings. There's lack of collaboration, lack of engagement, lack of focus on critical priorities. And finally, you would see FP&A teams are not able to drive elements like business partnering or perception of finance, as we've seen in earlier panelists' presentations through. So over the years, I realized different people process information differently. I also observed influences like attention span, outcome-oriented brain, power of presenting, or priming as we call it, and involving the audience through a journey. Empowered with these realizations, I worked on developing skills to communicate effectively with key decision makers. I'll explain it further in my next slide. Okay, so once upon a time, that's how stories go, right? Once upon a time in a professional life, I was faced with profit gap situation in a critical project. There was committed revenue that was lower than the roll-up of forecasted costs, leading to a serious issue with profitability and continuity. Sounds familiar, right? I mean, most of our FP&A colleagues and professionals there. We needed to take hard measures to cut costs and return to profitability. And in that particular case, even more importantly, sustainability. I simply laid the costs with drivers and compared it to the committed revenue, as you can see it on the graph. And I highlighted the gap without stating the amount or anything. I just highlighted and I gave it a pause. And within seconds, somebody from the audience popped up with a comment. We're losing money here. Yes, we were not making money and we needed to do something about it before we ran out of money and options. In next 1 hour, we went through every individual cost driver with the team in a transparent way that led to a hard choice I would otherwise have struggled to propose. There were a lot of things in the background, and I may have erred in this example on the side of oversimplification. But here, what was important learning for me was, if you are able to get and focus on attention, through storytelling, you let them come to the conclusions and drive the transparency. All these things lead to an engaged audience and fruitful discussions. I would highlight this further in my next slide. Okay, so this was a very simple lesson, and I had opportunities to look into storytelling at different fora involving different audience groups. So on the top left, here's an example of communicating multi-horizon business plans to senior management. With over 10 years integrated business plan, I had built a storyline around saturation of profits, investments, dilution, and resolution of the profit dilution through multiple inflection points. And those are highlighted with those rounded out. Here, we successfully advocated the need for continuous investment through the horizons and the deep investment analysis. Now, going down to the bottom left graph, in this case, we were dealing with the financial analyst or the greater analyst community during the pandemic. And the idea was to manage expectations of the external community through the crisis, where it was significant decline in quarterly revenue, and somehow restore the faith of the markets and the analyst community in the overall stability and continuity of the business. So what we did through this chart, the audience was taken through the current set of revenue growth, the pain or the trough that we were expecting of drop during the pandemic phases, and then a detailed scenario-driven recovery process illustrated with the help of data and scenario analysis. In the end, we were able to manage analyst community's expectations through the storytelling process during those very difficult times. So with that, coming to the final part of my talk today, I would re-emphasize the principles of storytelling. First, know your audience. There is no cookie cutter approach to storytelling. You have to tailor-make the story for each user audience group. There are, like a good novel, a good drama, a structured approach to storytelling. There is a setup, there has to be a conflict and a resolution. Ideally, the aha moments, the discovery process, should be done or should arrive by the audience themselves. Good stories are personal stories. If you know your business very well and can connect the personal dots through either data or anecdotes, the stories are powerful and long-lasting. And finally, it's not a storytelling exercise. All of this should drive decision-making through clarity, evidence, and connectivity. So as a conclusion, I would say, with a conscious effort, data could be turned into insights and further used for decision-making. As an FP&A professional, the power to control the narrative and the viewer's attention is vested with you. So go ahead and be a storyteller. Thanks, Hans. Over to you.
Saurabh, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. Great thinking point and great conclusion there, especially on that last page. Let me ask our fellow panelists to join us, and I'll put a question through to them, which is again around storytelling, as we've seen is key for FP&A in an organization. How are you making sure these skill sets are being taught and enhanced within your organization? Alistair, can you help us with the question, please?
So if I can help with it. But my focus actually is on hiring well in the first place. So making sure you got people with the right basic personality traits for the roles where this is really key. Because I think there are some people who will have a tendency to be great at it, and some who, however hard you try and coach them, may continue to be crap at it. So I think hiring well is important, and then the general mindset I try and, or question I ask the whole time, sort of several times a day, is so what? So what? And I think if you get the whole team thinking about so what, why is this of interest to my audience, they can convert whatever it is they're looking at, whatever analysis, under any circumstance, like why am I doing this? Who is it for? How will they use it? So if people start thinking so what, they'll probably become better at telling stories as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for that. Valerie, your answer?
Yes. So I really loved your presentation, Saurabh. So it's very telling for me, and it's very practical from my experience too. I would say the way that I'm pushing this is by the best way to learn is through situations. So current processes that exist today, report out is like, tell me the story, tell me the so what, really understand your audience. I think that's the #1 key. And I would say for me, like what I've been telling my team is executives don't want to be drowned in numbers. They want to know a story. They want to understand insights. And if not, they're going to get lost in detail. So how do you say that in whatever you're doing today and make sure you have a point of view? So I think that's really key.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Valerie, and Saurabh, great presentation. Let us move on to the next piece, but I think the next piece here is our key takeaways. So please stay on the webcam. So here it's all about conclusion. Before I come to that, let me remind our audience, guys, we've got great Q&A session coming shortly after this. Please keep sending your questions via the chat box. We will attempt to answer some of these today, but definitely all of them will be answered via email. So please keep sending them. So Alistair, if I come to you, what will be your key conclusion? One quick conclusion, please.
My key conclusion for it is communicate and control your narrative. I think if you're setting the agenda and setting the way people look at your team, that's a set of a great positive feedback loop that will enable people to really kind of release their more empathetic side and actually work with people and have good relationships.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Valerie, your key conclusion, please.
Yeah, sure. I would say not work harder, but just differently. So change your mindset. So focus a lot on the how and observe how people are doing around you. So about being courageous, speaking up, try new things, make mistakes. How do you receive feedback? How do you give feedback? Over communicate. I think it's all things that will actually benefit you to tell the story and being better value in your organization.
Thank you, Valerie. Finally, Saurabh, your conclusion, please.
So my conclusion is make automation your friend. step on it, use it. In 10 years, 2030, we're talking about, but much earlier than that. A lot of data processing, visualization, connecting multiple dots will become a routine where robots will take over. But what will differentiate a human is the interpersonal sensitivity and defining the meaning behind it. So be a friend to automation and develop these skills that will be much more warranted in future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for key conclusion. Let me share with you, and please stay on the webcam. These are the key conclusion and recommendations that came out of the paper, basically. And again, I think you all three of you panelists have covered this. Make process a priority, embrace FP&A, so going beyond finance, skill audit, hire with the future in mind, create a continuous program of development within the organization. And Saurabh, you just talked about tools and technology. Equip FP&A with the right sort of tools. Thinking outside of the box is another key thing. Lead from the front. Culture, leadership is one of the key things. And of course, it is a loop. It is a continuous circle. So you have to revisit all of these all the time. And I'll be sharing with you a link of the paper later on. So please go and have a look at that and then read through the whole paper. Lots of exciting stuff there. It is now a good time for us to start our Q&A sessions. And as I mentioned, please keep sending your questions. We will answer a few today. The rest of them we will do via email. So first question goes to Alistair. Alistair, you had a very challenging couple of years within your role in terms of recruiting your team, etc. In terms of skill set, which one did you find the most challenging to bring within the team or to find within the team, and how did you meet that challenge?
I think I found it generally straightforward to find quite experienced business partners. Where there's, as I gather from Clarissa speaks to you, sort of a global shortage that we see as well, is getting really highly qualified, talented professionals. So getting kind of top tier hires out of like Big Four practice, that kind of thing is really difficult for a business operating unless you've got kind of Google-sized wads of cash to throw at people. So getting really talented, bright people in is difficult. So of course, COVID has meant that talent has become really scarce, and are we also then seeing from your angle, Alistair, that recruitment salaries are so much more than what they used to be 3-4 years ago? So yeah. It's certainly disappointing when I compare it with my own salary 15 years ago. Yeah, you sort of feel like you might have missed out by starting earlier. But yeah, so I think you end up paying a premium. You pay a premium for talented people who come from a good training background. We've definitely seen that, and it's something that the business is kind of learning to accept. But
thank you very much for that. So let's go to Valerie. I've got a very interesting question from our audience. What is the biggest risk and threat to FP&A as far as skill set is concerned?
That's a very good question. I would say the risk. I would say if we don't change our mindset and we just focus on the what, I think similar to what Saurabh said, like there's a lot of automation that are out there. So it's really being courageous, think outside the box, not be as competitive against each other, and really look at what we do and how we could bring value. And I think it's just focusing on being curious and really on how can we work as one team, because I do think there's FP&A is more and more in demand. There's a lot of great topics we could bring into. It's just how to think differently.
Thank you very much for that, Valerie. Our last question goes to Saurabh. Saurabh, thank you for taking us through the excellent storytelling and how we should be doing this. Can you tell us about the challenges you yourself meet within your organization in terms of that particular skill set, and how do you go about training those people on storytelling itself?
So again, a good question. So it's a combination of mindset, opportunity, and the way you look at things. So there is an approach, or there was an approach some years ago about bean counting, and finance was considered to be counters. They would be going through the numbers, and they would just be putting the numbers through, and that process changes with active leadership if you take up on influencing the organization. So I always strongly believe that it starts from the top. Visionary leaders who have a strong presence in the decision-making process or on the decision table lead by example. So a lot of the skills I learned were from exemplary leadership that I had an opportunity to follow, people who looked at things differently. And that process was, whatever goes out, ask yourself, who's the reader? What am I saying? What he or she would want to look at? And is the key message coming out clearly? And I can go and talk about it, but one big example is every presentation, every slide, every report, I emphasized my team to write one takeaway as a title. So a monthly sales report is like, it go out as a monthly sales report. Not anymore. The top line of the title has to be a 3% growth compared to the market expectations observed in the month of December. And this was a task given to a first level analyst as well, whose job was just doing that. Now, he was asking these 3 questions that I brought out earlier, every time, every month. Who's it going to? What are they expecting? And what is my key contribution today? So just as an example.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you very much for that, Saurabh. Great 3 questions, great 3 answers. Guys, that's all we have for today in terms of time for Q&A. But please, you've got another couple of minutes. Please keep sending your question. We will attempt to answer them via email very definitely. So last few slides, guys, if you want to stay on the webcam, please do so. Just quickly, we've only just scratched the bottom a little bit of the Skills of the Future paper. So please, you can download it from here, go and read it. There is lots of exciting insight coming out of there. FP&A Empowerment Survey 2022. Your feedback is definitely something that we would look forward to. And there's a link there. So please do help us, give us your insight again. Finally, next few events coming along. So FP&A Trends Webinar on reinventing FP&A, the top 5 lessons learned from the pandemic. What did we learn? How have we put it into practice? Feb 22nd. And the next one is Digital Central European FP&A Board, where we will talk about why driver-based planning matters so much for FP&A, March the 3rd on that one. It is now a good time for me to say thank you to our sponsor, Unit4, for making this possible. A big thank you to Alistair, Valerie, and Saurabh for taking time out, but much more importantly, for sharing all the insights they have, their case study with us. So thank you very much, panelists. And thank you very much to all of the people who made time to attend. Hopefully this had been a very insightful session for you. Just leaving you with a few thoughts of how you could link up with us. Just before I close the webinar, I would like to just highlight that there is a feedback session there. So please stay for a minute and give us your feedback and tell us what else you would like to listen in the future. So this brings us nicely to the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. Bye.